Man, what's happening right now with this Charlie Kirk thing? It's one of those moments that makes you stop and go, wait, what the hell is actually going on? Because the way the story is being told, it feels incomplete. And in some cases, it feels like people are straight up steering the narrative. So let's back up. Tyler Robinson, 22-year-old guy from Utah. He's not just some random dude who snapped overnight. Investigators are piecing together his digital footprint, and man, it's wild. Social media posts, Discord chats, weird online communities. It's like watching a slow-motion descent into radicalization, and it was happening right out in the open. And this is the scary part. It wasn't just him. Investigators think he was plugged into networks, little corners of the internet, where extreme rhetoric isn't fringe, it's normal. These aren't just chat rooms. For a lot of young people, they're full-on social lives. Politics, fantasy, memes, gaming, identity, all getting mashed together until lines blur. And when you look at it from that angle, it's not just troubled young man does bad thing. It's more like we're watching entire ecosystems online crank people up into these states where violence feels like an option. That's heavy, dude. What makes it even crazier is what happened after. The coverage, the spin, the way media outlets, politicians, even academics rushed to shape the story. And that's not a partisan dig. I don't trust either side when it comes to this stuff. Republicans, Democrats, they all play the blame game. Me? I'm not team red or team blue. I'm just an American looking at the facts, trying to understand what's real. And here's what bugs me. Truth has this way of bubbling up even when people are trying hard to bury it. And the stuff that's coming out about Robinson's online life, it doesn't line up neatly with the packaged narrative being handed down from mainstream outlets. That's when you've got to ask, why are they so nervous about the real story getting out? So who was Robinson really? Online, he's bouncing between Discord servers, furry sites, gaming groups, places where, honestly, if you didn't grow up with that stuff, it sounds bizarre. But for this generation, those aren't just hobbies. They're whole communities. It's where they hang out, where they form friendships, where ideas, even extreme ones, stop sounding extreme because everyone around you is saying the same thing.
Investigators didn't just stumble into this. They matched usernames, writing styles, tracked his interests, and laid out a trail that looks like a roadmap of radicalization.
And that roadmap raises way bigger questions than one tragic event. Because the issue here isn't left versus right. It's not a talking point for politicians. It's how vulnerable people, especially young men, can get sucked into worlds online that normalize hate and violence, while the rest of us have no clue what's happening until it's too late. So here's where it gets really unsettling. Investigators went through Tyler Robinson's Discord history. And if you don't know what Discord is, think of it as the modern version of those old AOL chat rooms, but way more advanced. People spend hours in these servers. It's where communities live now. And what they found in his messages, it wasn't a guy who just snapped out of nowhere. He'd been talking about political violence for months. His online persona evolved over time. First it's jokes, then it's references to manifestos, then weapons, then memes that are funny to insiders but horrifying once you realize the context. One detail that really stuck out, investigators found ammo casings at the scene with phrases on them, stuff that only made sense if you'd been deep in those communities online. It's like he was leaving breadcrumbs back to the digital world that shaped him. But here's the important thing. This wasn't just one isolated guy typing into the void. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became that he was part of a network. These communities, the coded language, the memes, it was coordinated in a way. Shared ideology, a feedback loop. And then you've got the real world connection. Lance Twiggs, Robinson's boyfriend and roommate, his digital footprint tells another piece of the story. Twiggs identified as transgender, was openly political online, big supporter of Democratic politicians, but also posted more and more hostile stuff about conservatives and Christians. Now, here's what's important. It's not just about Twiggs' political stance. It's the influence he had on Robinson. Family members and friends told investigators they watched this transformation happen in real time. Robinson grew up in what they described as a fairly typical Republican household, but after getting involved with Twigs, they said he changed dramatically. Not just disagreements, they said it turned into pure hatred. His family actually cut ties with him. Think about how intense that island parents, siblings, the people who know you best saying they were afraid of their own son or brother because of what he might do. That's heartbreaking and scary. And they directly pointed to Twigs' influence. They said Robinson went from a guy with normal disagreements to someone filled with what they called evil and hatred. It wasn't slow either. They described it as dramatic, sudden, enough that they felt they had to protect themselves. This is what's fascinating and disturbing about radicalization today. It's not just about consuming content online, it's about relationships. If somebody you love, somebody close to you, keeps validating those extreme ideas, reinforcing them, that accelerates the process. It makes the crazy feel normal. Investigators found Twigs had been posting anti-conservative stuff for years, pro-Biden content, hostile rhetoric toward Republicans and Christians, and people who knew him said it wasn't just political. They described him as someone who hated those groups and expressed it in increasingly aggressive ways. That's how radicalization works now. It's digital communities, yeah, but it's also amplified through personal bonds. And when those two overlap, online echo chambers plus intimate real-world relationships, the effect can be explosive. You know what nobody talks about enough? How much intimate relationships factor into radicalization. Like, it's one thing to watch YouTube videos or scroll Twitter rants, but when the same stuff gets reinforced in your daily conversations by the person you live with, the person you trust, it stops sounding like politics and starts sounding like truth. For Robinson, living with somebody who kept echoing that hostility toward conservatives and Christians probably didn't just feed the fire, it poured gasoline on it. That kind of constant reinforcement can take you from being just an angry young guy to becoming somebody who's methodically planning violence. And that's the thing, what happens online never stays online. It bleeds into the real world. Investigators say that's exactly what happened here. The FBI has been building a timeline, and it shows Robinson's online chatter shifting from just ranting about politics into actual planning, weapons, hiding them, how to use them. This wasn't a dude who just snapped one day. This was somebody preparing step by step and talking about it with others. One of the scariest details they found: he was messaging about the rifle used hours before the attack, describing how he'd stash it under foliage wrapped in a towel. That's not spontaneous. That's premeditation. And when you combine that with his obsession with manifestos and political targets, you're looking at calculated political terrorism. Even Utah's governor, after being briefed by the FBI and talking to Robinson's family, confirmed the kid had been heavily influenced by leftist ideology. But here's the thing, it's not just about he believed this political stuff. It's about whether this was bigger than him. Investigators are now digging into whether this attack was part of a coordinated network. They're asking, did people in his online communities know? Were they encouraging it? And the evidence says maybe yes. And if that's the case, then this isn't just one troubled young man. This is a group, a digital cell, a network of people nurturing, reinforcing, maybe even planning acts of political terrorism together. That's the part that should freak everybody out. Left, right, doesn't matter. The FBI is basically describing these Discord groups and online communities as breeding grounds for radicalization. They're not just venting spots. They're sophisticated ecosystems where extreme ideology gets normalized, where violent talk becomes casual, where plotting starts to sound like strategy. So when you look at Robinson, investigators are saying this wasn't just rage. It wasn't just he disagreed with conservatives. It was years of online radicalization, reinforced in his closest relationship, culminating in a premeditated attack and potentially backed by others in the same online bubble. That's dark. But here's where it gets even stranger. Instead of wrestling with those facts, instead of saying, okay, what do we do about this digital terror culture? Big media outlets went another way. They started spinning. They started telling a different story. And look, this is why I don't buy into either party. I'm not Republican. I'm not Democrat. I'm just an American who supports personal freedom, same-sex marriage, women's rights, gay rights, legal weed, universal health care, universal basic income, gun rights. I don't fit in either camp. And that's why I get so skeptical when I see the narrative machine kick in, because both sides do it. And that's what we saw here. Instead of reporting on Robinson's connections to leftist extremism, his relationship dynamics, the radicalization timeline, the anti-conservative online groups' mainstream coverage started telling a story that didn't match the evidence. And when that happens, you've got to stop and ask who benefits from that spin. Why is the real picture, the uncomfortable, messy truth, being hidden from regular Americans who just want the facts? Here's the part that'll make your head spin. The minute this story broke, major newspapers and TV networks went full throttle trying to paint Robinson as some kind of conservative extremist, which is crazy because when you look at the actual evidence, his hatred of Christians and conservatives, his relationship with anti-Republican activists, the communities he was plugged into, it doesn't line up at all. And it didn't stop there. You had academics, people who were supposed to be all about truth and evidence, jumping on this too. Some professors even started pushing this wild theory that Robinson's attack happened because his target wasn't right-wing enough. Like, what? That's the kind of intellectual gymnastics that would be hilarious if it wasn't so dangerous. Look, I've seen plenty of media bias over the years. We all have. But what's happening right now, it feels different. This isn't just picking and choosing what details to highlight. This is full-on narrative construction, fabricated alternate realities being built in real time so that regular people never get the full picture. And you got to ask yourself, why? Why go to such lengths to spin something so obviously documented? The answer is pretty clear, because if the truth about Robinson's radicalization gets out, it forces uncomfortable conversations about what ideologies are actually radicalizing young people in America today. And that's a conversation a lot of powerful groups don't want to have. This is why media literacy matters more than ever. We don't live in an era where you can just flip on the TV and trust what you hear. You've got to be a detective. You've got to cross-check, look at multiple sources, ask who benefits from the story being told. Because when you see outlets twisting themselves into knots to reframe obvious evidence, when you see academics ditching intellectual honesty to protect a political narrative, when you see coordinated efforts to bury certain facts, that's not bias anymore. That's systematic manipulation. And that's what the Robinson case shows us. The facts are there, the timeline is clear, investigators documented his path step by step, and yet powerful institutions are bending over backwards to make sure most Americans never fully grasp what those facts actually mean. That's bigger than just one case. That's about whether we, as a country, still have institutions that care about truth at all. Because when major players, media, academia, politicians are willing to suppress or distort reality just to protect their preferred narrative, it's not just about left or right anymore. It's about whether people can trust anyone. And here's where I'll be real with you. I don't trust either side. I'm not team Republican. I'm not team Democrat. I'm socially liberal. I support same-sex marriage, gay rights, women's rights, legal weed, universal health care, even UBI. But I also support gun rights and the Second Amendment. I don't fit in either of their boxes. I just want the truth. I just want honesty. And when I see it being twisted like this, it tells me the truth must be so threatening to the people in charge that they'll suppress it at all costs. That's the scary part. Because once institutions start treating truth itself like a threat, democracy takes a hit. And every American, left, right, whatever, should be concerned about that. Here's where the stakes shoot way up. Because once the truth starts leaking out about Robinson, about how he got radicalized, about the networks that backed it up, the whole thing stops being just one tragic story and turns into something much bigger. The FBI is not treating this like a lone wolf situation anymore. They've expanded the investigation, and what they're uncovering, man, it should concern every single American who values living in a peaceful democracy. What they've found is that the online spaces Robinson was hanging out in weren't just chat groups or venting forums. These were sophisticated networks. People weren't just sharing memes. They were sharing target info, coordinating messaging, maybe even planning real-world actions. And the scale of it is staggering. We're not talking about a dozen guys in a basement somewhere. We're talking thousands of people spread across states, all connected through Discord servers, social media, even hobby forums that look harmless on the surface. Some of these groups have been tracking personal info on conservative leaders, posting addresses, talking about ways to neutralize political threats. That's next level disturbing. And Robinson's case isn't unique. Investigators are saying it fits a pattern they're seeing all over the country, young people systematically radicalized online. It's not just politics either. It's politics mixed with other subcultures. Gaming, furry communities, anime forums, you name it. These spaces become recruiting grounds where the politics gets baked in alongside the hobbies. The really troubling part is the coordination. Evidence suggests that some people in Robinson's network actually knew what he was planning. Some may have encouraged him. If that's true, then this wasn't one guy losing it. This was coordinated domestic terrorism. And here's the thing. For people who lived through other political tensions in America, like the unrest in the 60s or the Oklahoma City bombing in the 90s, this feels different. Back then, extremists were often isolated, cut off. They didn't have an easy way to connect, to reinforce each other, to plan in real time. But today, these kids have tools that give them global reach. Discord, encrypted chats, forums, live streams. They can find each other instantly, build echo chambers, pump each other up, and coordinate across state lines. And what starts as just an internet community can evolve into something way scarier, an actual terrorist cell with the ability to plan and execute violence. And when investigators start using that kind of language, cells, coordination, domestic terrorism, that's when, this is crossed out of politics. This isn't about left versus right anymore. It's about security, stability, and whether people can walk around without being afraid of politically motivated violence. That's when the government shifts gears. Once law enforcement starts applying the legal terminology of terrorism, it signals they're not treating this as random acts anymore. They're treating it as organized, deliberate threats. And when that happens, the whole conversation changes from politics to national security. So here's the big move the Trump administration made in this whole situation. They're not treating what Robinson did as just some crime or even just another political shooting. They're calling it what they say it is, terrorism. And that's not just a word choice. That's a legal decision. Once you put the terrorism label on something, it opens up a whole different playbook for the government. It means the FBI, Homeland Security, all these agencies suddenly have access to tools they wouldn't normally use for just a criminal case. Cross-state investigations, monitoring networks instead of just individuals, coordinating across federal agencies, that all becomes fair game. When Stephen Miller and J.D. Vance came out together to talk about it, the words they chose were deliberate. They didn't frame it as political disagreement. They didn't even frame it as regular crime. They said flat out, this is domestic terrorism. This is a terror network that needs to be dismantled. That's a huge escalation in how the government is looking at this. For people who lived through the post 9/11 years, you'll recognize the language. This is the same framework that was used on foreign terror groups. And the message is clear. The administration is saying certain forms of political extremism here at home have crossed the line from speech into actual terrorism that threatens democracy itself. Miller even used this phrase about channeling righteous anger into systematic action to uproot and dismantle terrorist networks. That's not a cop talking about arrests. That's someone laying out a full-blown campaign to destroy organizations from the ground up. And with that designation, a whole bunch of actions suddenly become possible. The government can treat these networks the way they'd treat Al-Qaeda or ISIS. That means surveillance, resource sharing, coordinated investigations, and the ability to prosecute people under national security laws instead of just criminal ones. They've already started moving. Federal investigators are looking not just at Robinson and his direct circle, but at bigger left-wing organizations they believe might have influenced or supported the networks he was part of. The idea is that this goes way beyond one person. It's about the ecosystem that radicalizes people in the first place. And one of the biggest developments, the decision to cut federal funding to any academic institution that, in their view, promotes or tolerates extremist ideology. That's a major shift. Because now it's not just about punishing the individuals who commit violence. It's about targeting the pipelines where those ideas are being nurtured. The administration saying if universities are feeding this kind of ideology, they're not going to get taxpayer dollars. On top of that, they're preparing to arrest and prosecute people who've been openly calling for violence online. And here's the key. They're not framing those people as just loudmouths or keyboard warriors. They're calling them seditionists, terrorists, people who pose a direct threat to American democracy. That's the framework they're working in now. And whether you agree or disagree with the approach, it's a fundamental shift. It's the government saying this isn't politics anymore. This is terrorism. And once you flip that switch, you're talking about a very different level of response. One of the biggest moves the administration made in this whole thing is about immigration. They're not just going after people directly tied to Robinson's network. They're also revoking visas and taking action against foreign nationals who celebrated or supported the attack. That's a heavy step, but the message is clear. Political violence against Americans isn't just another news story. It's going to have real-world consequences that go way beyond the usual criminal justice system. And when you zoom out, you can see the strategy here. It's built on two pillars, and honestly, they're the same two that have historically worked when it comes to dismantling extremist groups. First, cut off their money. Second, lock up their leaders. You shut down the financing that keeps the machine running, while at the same time removing the people at the top who push the ideology forward. Without funding and without leadership, the whole structure collapses. That's what's happening now. The administration's basically saying we're not treating this as just a law enforcement issue anymore. This isn't about cops handling riots or prosecutors handling one-off cases. This is national security. That's a totally different lens. It means the full toolbox that's usually aimed at foreign terrorist organizations, think Al-Qaeda, ISIS, is now being turned inward, applied to domestic networks that threaten American citizens. And that's unprecedented. If you've been watching political violence escalate the past few years, you know how messy and inconsistent the response has been. But this is the first systematic attempt to dismantle domestic terror networks using the full weight of federal authority. Every lever of power, financial, legal, surveillance, immigration being pulled at once. Now, the long-term implications of this are huge. If it works, if they succeed in collapsing these networks, it could change the landscape of American politics for a generation. Those groups that have been spreading extremist rhetoric across multiple states, recruiting people online, and acting with relative impunity, they could disappear, or at least be pushed so far underground they can't operate the same way. But here's the flip side. If it fails, if these groups adapt, if they evolve into even more secretive, more sophisticated organizations, then we're looking at a whole new level of domestic terrorism. That's the gamble. You hit them hard now, but if you don't eliminate them, you risk creating a smarter, more dangerous version of the same threat. So what does that mean for the rest of us? For regular Americans just watching this unfold? That's where it gets heavy. Because the Robinson case isn't just about one attack. It's not even just about one network. It's a mirror, showing us how political hatred takes root and spreads in modern America. Think about it. This case revealed how our own tools, the stuff we use for entertainment and connection, can get weaponized. Discord, gaming platforms, social media, they can all become breeding grounds for radicalization. It showed how a young man can get systematically turned against his own family, his own community, through online manipulation. And that's maybe the most important takeaway. These threats aren't inevitable. They're not unstoppable. These networks thrive because they thought they could hide in the shadows, that nobody would ever hold them accountable. By calling them what they are, terrorists, and by using the national security playbook, the government just flipped the script. That changes the calculus entirely. Suddenly, those groups don't get to pretend they're just edgy communities or political clubs. They're on the same playing field as terrorist cells. And that means everything they do comes with consequences they didn't think they'd ever face. Here's the thing, man, if you've lived through multiple eras of American life, you know, this moment feels different. We've seen political tension before. We've seen waves of extremism, the radical groups of the 60s, the domestic bombings in the 70s, even Oklahoma City in the 90s. Those were all ugly chapters. But what's happening right now? It feels unique because the response is more comprehensive than anything we've ever seen aimed at domestic extremism. The Robinson case lit a fuse. It became the catalyst for something that's been simmering for years: the online radicalization of young people, the coordination of violence through digital networks, even institutions that look the other way or quietly enable extremist ideology. All of that's been building. And for the first time, the government's not just putting out fires one by one. They're going after the entire system. And that's what makes this moment significant. It's forcing a choice. On one side, you've got a vision of America where we just accept political violence as part of the landscape. Like, this is just how democracy works now. You manage it, you hope it doesn't spiral, but you basically accept that terror attacks are going to happen. On the other side, you've got the vision that says, no, this is existential. If we let political terrorism become normalized, democracy itself collapses. So you bring the full weight of government, law enforcement, and national security to bear, and you dismantle the networks that make this stuff possible. From everything we're seeing in the Robinson case, the administration has clearly picked that second path. They're not tolerating this as the new normal. They're saying this is terrorism, and we're going to crush the networks that feed it. Now, for people who remember calmer times when you could argue about politics without fearing for your safety, when young people weren't being radicalized in online rabbit holes, this hits home. Because the stakes aren't abstract. The success or failure of this approach will literally determine what kind of democracy the next generation inherits. Do they grow up in a country where political differences can be resolved peacefully, or in a country where terrorism is just the cost of doing politics? And here's another angle the Robinson case revealed: media literacy. This whole saga exposed how desperate certain outlets were to spin, to reframe, to hide the real story. They didn't want you to know how this kid got radicalized or what communities helped push him over the edge. That's why now, more than ever, you've got to be a critical consumer of information. Especially for seniors out there, you guys lived through the time when journalism actually felt different, when you could turn on the news and, for the most part, expect facts instead of political theater. Today, it's all narratives. So the skill set has to change. You've got to spot bias, cross-check multiple sources, and really ask who benefits from me believing this story. That's not paranoia. That's survival in today's information ecosystem. And the digital side of this, that's the part that's hardest to wrap your head around if you didn't grow up with it. A lot of older Americans hear online community and they think, oh, some kids playing video games, who cares? But what Robinson's case showed us is that these aren't just hobbies. These online communities can become entire worlds. They can form identities, shape beliefs, and reinforce hatred until it feels normal. And then it jumps offline into the real world. The FBI made it clear Robinson didn't just wake up one morning with violent ideas. He was pulled into a digital culture where violence was encouraged, where targets were discussed, where even things like ammo casings had coded messages tied back to those communities. That's how online becomes offline. And that's why this case matters so much. It shows us that ignoring what happens in those corners of the internet is no longer an option. Now, the way the administration is handling it, defunding institutions that spread extremist ideology, arresting sympathizers, dismantling coordinated networks, it's the most systematic response to domestic political violence in generations. We've never seen this level of coordination aimed at American extremists before. And whether it succeeds or fails is going to shape our politics for decades. But here's the catch. It doesn't just depend on what the government does. It also depends on us, the public. If people don't understand what actually happened with Robinson, if they buy into the media spin or tune out entirely, then the support for dismantling these networks dries up. People need to see clearly how this stuff works, how a kid from a mainstream family becomes a terrorist, to understand why such aggressive measures are necessary. And that's where you come in. If you're listening to this, you've lived through different eras. You've seen America adapt to challenges before wars, recessions, social upheavals. You've got context that younger generations don't have. Your perspective matters in this conversation. So ask yourself, do you think this is the breaking point in American politics? Do you see young people in your own community thinking differently about political differences? Do you notice how online communities, even stuff that looks harmless, can shape attitudes in ways we didn't expect? These are the questions we got to be talking about openly, because your voice, your experience provides something crucial context. You know that America has reinvented itself before. You know that challenges can be met if people are honest about them. And that kind of wisdom, it's the antidote to the chaos we're seeing now. And look, if you're finding this breakdown useful, hit that like button, subscribe, whatever platform you're on, because this isn't over.